What would Martin Luther King say if he saw Jacob Blake standing there at the end of the day, with the tired look of someone who already knows how this world treats bodies like his? He wouldn't shout, he wouldn't rant, but you would feel in his silence a disappointment that weighs more than any fiery speech. Because Martin Luther King has been there. Not exactly in Kenosha, but in all the places where dark skin is a sentence even before the trial. He wouldn't be surprised by the gunshots. And that's the most devastating thing. Have you ever stopped to think about that? How much the absurd has ceased to be absurd, how much the unacceptable has become routine. Jacob took 7 shots in the back. 7. In front of his children. The police didn't see a father. They saw a threat. A black body that moves, that speaks, that insists on existing. Is that enough for someone to pull the trigger? Martin Luther King would see this and understand that the wound is still bleeding. The same wound, the same one he tried to staunch with words, marches, linked arms, eyes turned to the sky. Can you feel the weight of that, or have you gotten used to it? Because that's what he would talk about. He would look at you and ask, when did we start calling this normal? When did you start thinking this is someone else's problem? He wouldn't use metaphors. He wouldn't try to convince you with poetry. He would just show you Jacob's motionless body on the ground and ask, how many more? Martin Luther King wouldn't romanticize this suffering. He would say in no uncertain terms that the United States and so many other countries that have learned from its example still fail in a basic lesson: humanity. What do you see when you look at a black man? What do you feel when you hear that he was shot in the back? Do you sigh? Do you turn your face away? Do you wait for the video to end and go back to your day? He would say this with a firm voice. He wouldn't shout, but you would feel ashamed to look away. Martin Luther King would understand why the protests are happening. He would understand the crying, the anger, the cries of enough. He would know that these people aren't just protesting for Jacob. They're protesting for themselves, for their children, for a life where they no longer have to explain, justify, prove that they deserve to live. And he would also remind you of one thing. It's not just about the police. It's about everything. It's about where this kind of racism begins. Because no one is born afraid of a black man. No one is born thinking he deserves to die. This is taught. This is repeated until it becomes an invisible rule. And that rule, Martin Luther King would say, is what needs to be broken. Do you realize how deep this is? It's not just the bullet. It's the culture that aimed that gun long before it was fired. Martin Luther King wouldn't ask you to feel sorry. He wouldn't accept the discourse that not all cops are bad. It wasn't because of racism, but he had a record. He's heard it all before. There's always a justification. There's always a distraction. And the death keeps being swept under the rug of history, along with so many others. Do you remember what he dreamed of? That thing that became a quote on T-shirts, on social media posts, in political speeches. Judge by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And then you look at Jacob. Does his character matter now? Did it matter then? Did anyone there ask who he was? Or was it enough to see the color? Martin Luther King would know that the problem isn't the absence of laws, but the absence of courage. Courage to change structures. Courage to lose privileges. Courage to be bothered even when it's not happening to you. He always said, what worries me is not the cry of the wicked, but the silence of the good. Have you been silent? He would walk through Kenosha and see exhausted faces. People carrying signs with calloused hands, people who don't want to carry coffins anymore. Children who too early learn to raise their hands before speaking. Women who have to teach their sons not to run, not to answer back, not to exist with too much freedom. Can you imagine what that's like? Martin Luther King would see in those streets the reflection of the ones he already walked. Selma, Montgomery, Washington. The cities change, but the echo remains the same. The dream he had, maybe it's still alive, but it's wounded. It's lying in a hospital bed next to Jacob. It's asking for justice. It's trying to breathe. Can you feel that? Because that's where the harshest truth lies. The problem isn't just the cop who shot, it's the system that taught him he could. It's the society that accepts it as collateral damage. It's the culture that still refuses to look in the mirror. And you, in that mirror, what do you see? Martin Luther King believed it was possible to transform all of this, but not alone. He never talked about revolution without talking about responsibility. He knew that change begins when someone decides not to be silent anymore. When someone decides that they will no longer accept the world the way it is. When someone says, I see, I care, I want to be part of the change. Have you said that? Because if you don't say it, who will? Martin Luther King is no longer here to march, but he still speaks. He speaks for Jacob, for George, for Breonna, for so many voices silenced before their time. He speaks for every child who is afraid of the world today. He speaks for you too, because deep down, he knew that fighting racism is fighting for all of humanity, and he wouldn't ask permission to say that. He would just say it, and he would hope that you would listen. So it's time to understand that silence is also a choice, and every choice builds the world where you live. If you stand idly by in the face of injustice, then that injustice settles in, gains space, grows. It feeds on your omission, and Martin Luther King knew that like no other. He would look at the crowds in silence and ask, who are you waiting for to speak? How many bodies will need to fall until it's enough to truly bother you? He wouldn't mince words to tell you that. He would say it looking into your eyes. As long as there is a system that normalizes violence against black people, none of us are truly safe. Because it's not just about who gets shot. It's about who has learned to live with it without questioning. He would walk through Kenosha and see in the eyes of every young black person a mixture of fear and resistance. It's not just fear of the police. Yeah, it's fear of going out, of coming back, of living. But it's also the resistance of those who are still here, of those who still dream, still breathe, still get up. Martin Luther King called this tragic hope, the kind that knows the pain, but doesn't give up on the future. And do you give up easily? It's just that maybe it's more comfortable to think that things are getting better, that all of this are isolated cases. But Martin Luther King would remind you that isolated cases only seem isolated to those who don't feel it in their skin, to those who have the privilege of turning off the TV, closing the cell phone and moving on. Those who are black don't have that break. The violence isn't an episode, it's the background scenery. It's in the rejected resume, in the denied job, in the suspicious look, in the aggressive approach, in the tone of voice that changes when the last name is the wrong one. Have you ever paid attention to that? Because he did. Every gesture, every absence, every phrase that starts with, but he also, all of this weighs. All of this builds a cycle. And cycles are not broken with good intentions. They are broken with choices. Real choices. Choices that cost. Choices that hurt. And Martin Luther King knew that talking about equality without touching on discomfort is just a disguised way of keeping everything as it is. He never wanted to make you comfortable. He wanted to wake you up. Because comfort on top of the pain of others isn't comfort. It's cowardice. Do you feel that in your chest? Then look again. 7 shots. 7. It's not statistics. It's a body. It's flesh. It's life. Jacob Blake became a paraplegic. His life changed. So did his children's. They saw everything. They were there, wide eyes, racing hearts. What do you think those children learned about the world that day? What kind of future grows inside those who witnessed this so early? Martin Luther King would cry for those children, but he wouldn't let himself be paralyzed. He always believed that even the darkest days call for light. Not the naive light of someone who pretends that racism is over, but the courageous light of someone who decides to face it, even knowing how deep it is. And it's deep, deeper than you think. Racism isn't just in the final act. It starts much earlier. It starts in the schools that offer less, in the neighborhood that has less policing when the danger is real, and more armed presence when the danger is presumed. It starts in the bank that denies credit, in the hospital that ignores symptoms, in the justice system that weighs more when the defendant is black. Martin Luther King called this invisible violence, the kind that doesn't make the news, but it kills slowly. It prevents dreams. It erases futures. And he said that as dangerous as explicit hatred is the indifference disguised as normality. Are you being indifferent? Because every time you ignore a racist joke, you allow it. Every time you say it's whining, that it's an exaggeration, that it's a thing of the past, you're saying to racism, you can stay, no one will bother you here. And he would be outraged by that. Because he was beaten, arrested, threatened with death, had his house attacked, his family threatened. All because he believed that love can conquer. But he also knew that true love is not passive. It's active. It confronts. It refuses to be complicit. And now? Do you refuse? Or are you going to keep saying it's not about you? Martin Luther King wouldn't accept neutrality. Because he's seen too much. He's seen black bodies dragged by trucks. He's seen churches exploding with children inside. He's seen mothers burying their children because of a color. He's seen leaders being assassinated at the altar of peace. And even so, he insisted, we need to resist with dignity. We need to keep our hearts clean. But he never said it was easy. He only said it was necessary. And today, in the face of Jacob Blake, he would ask, how many times are we going to have to repeat this story until someone really listens? Are you listening now? Because the world doesn't change with lamentations. It changes with presence, with responsibility, with positioning. And Martin Luther King was always clear on this. There is no peace without justice. And justice requires confrontation. Have you confronted? Have you put your body, your word, your action in the face of injustice? Or have you preferred the comfortable silence of those who don't want to get involved? He would see the protests, he would see the signs, he would see the crying, but he would also see the attempt to criminalize those who stand up. He would see racism trying to hide behind the law, order, public safety. And he would remind you, when the system is unjust, order becomes oppression. Martin Luther King believed in the law, but not in the law that serves the few. He believed in the law as an instrument of equality, not as a weapon for maintaining power. And he would never call justice a system where the cop shoots 7 times in the back and remains free, while an entire community remains trapped in trauma. Do you think that's fair? Could you explain that to a child? Because they're seeing, they're hearing, they're learning. And what do you teach when you are silent? Martin Luther King always said, each generation needs to fight its own battle for freedom. It's not enough to remember the heroes. It's necessary to honor what they started, to continue where they left off, and, above all, to prevent their dream from becoming just a beautiful memory. The dream has to become reality, and reality is built with attitudes, with choices, with courage. Do you have courage? Because he did. And he paid dearly for it, but even so he kept going. Because for him, living without fighting for justice was existing by halves, and he knew that every step, however small, could change destinies. Have you ever changed someone's destiny? Or have you lived only for yourself? Jacob Blake didn't choose to become a symbol. He just wanted to live, to go home, to see his children grow up. And even so, he became a statistic. One more name on the list, one more case that can be forgotten if you allow it. And Martin Luther King would say that forgetting is dying again, that ignoring is agreeing, that feigning neutrality is reinforcing violence. Do you still want to pretend? Or have you already understood that his dream now depends on you? He doesn't want your pity. He wants your stance. He wants you to see, to question, to feel, to act, to go beyond the sharing, the hashtag, the outburst, because racism doesn't unravel with loose words. It needs to be faced where it is born, within the structures, within the choices, within you. And that, Martin Luther King knew, requires hard work. But he also knew it's worth it. It's worth it when a black child grows up believing that they can dream. It's worth it when a father goes home without fear. It's worth it when silence gives way to voice, when cowardice gives way to presence, when apathy gives way to courageous love. Are you willing to give that love, or are you going to keep watching? He has already walked these streets. He has already smelled the fear. He has already seen the shadow of death, but he has also seen the brilliance of resistance, and it is this brilliance that keeps the dream alive. Now it's up to you. Are you going to let the dream fade, or are you going to be part of the flame? Martin Luther King wouldn't ask for your compassion. He would demand your action. Are you ready for that? Because he is watching. Jacob too. All those who came before. All those who didn't go home. And now it is you who is here. It is you who has a choice. So, what are you going to do? You saw Jacob Blake fall. You saw George Floyd scream. You saw Breonna Taylor die sleeping. You saw black bodies piling up in a silence that no one wants to face. You saw, and even so, maybe you thought there's nothing you can do. Maybe you thought it's too big, too old, too confusing. And if you thought that, you need to hear me until the end. Because Martin Luther King never talked about giving up. Not when they arrested him. not when they threw stones, not when they killed people next to him. He knew that racism is not the mistake of a few, it is the decision of many. It is a choice pushed generation by generation. It is a structure that is molded in the silence of those who could have said something. Could have, but didn't, because it was more convenient to wait. And do you still want to wait? That's the question. Are you going to wait for another body to fall? Are you going to wait for racism to show itself once again, as if it were still a surprise? Or are you going to do what needs to be done, even knowing that it won't be easy? It's easy to post a catchy slogan, easy to repeat that Black Lives Matter. But what about when it's time to listen to those who live it every day? What about when it's time to make space, to reconsider your position, to acknowledge that maybe you've been silent when you should have spoken up? Martin Luther King would say that the world changes when you change, not when you point the finger, but when you look in the mirror and ask yourself, what am I doing with the space I occupy? Are you doing anything? Because racism doesn't need weapons to function anymore. It needs inertia. It needs normalcy. It needs your absence, and that's what it feeds on. You don't have to shoot anyone to sustain this system. You just have to stand idly by. And now, after all this, after every face you've seen erased, are you still going to stand idly by? Martin Luther King believed that no one is free until we are all free, and that those who do not move consent. He didn't say it would be comfortable. He said it would be necessary. And this is for you now. It's your turn to step up, your turn to rise, not out of charity nor out of heroism, but because if you truly believe that every human being has value, then it makes no sense to keep pretending that the problem is only someone else's. Are you ready to stop pretending? Because it's not just about recognizing racism. It's about interrupting it where you live. It's about taking a stand when it's most difficult. It's about saying no even when it's easier to pretend you didn't see. Are you willing to do that? Martin Luther King always spoke of urgency. Now is the time. That's what he said. Not later, not when things calm down, not when it's convenient. Now, because racism doesn't wait. It acts, it moves, it makes its presence known. And you? Will you be absent? Or will you do something? You don't have to change the whole world, but you can change your posture. You can change the conversation. You can change the environment where you live. You can start being part of the answer, not the problem. You can stop watching from afar. You can step out of your comfort zone. Do you have the courage for that? Because if you do, then now is the time. It's here. It's in this moment. It's in this discomfort you feel right now. It's in this restlessness that still pulses inside you. Don't ignore it. Don't put it off until tomorrow. Because while you hesitate, someone is dying because of the color of their skin. And that's not an exaggeration. It's what's happening. Are you going to wait until it happens to you? Or will you rise up before it does? Martin Luther King believed that love was a political force, but not this weak, soft, embellished love. It was the love that confronts, the one that demands, the one that doesn't hide, the one that rises up when everyone is silent. This love demands more of you. It asks for courage. It asks for action. And it asks for it now. Can you give that? Then give it, not because someone asked you to, but because you know it has to be this way. Because you feel that you can no longer live in a world where being black still means running the risk of death for existing. And if you feel that, then it's your turn.